So we've got a lot of hot spring water somewhere. What can you do with it? The purpose of this presentation is to look at some practical uses for all that hot spring water. First and most obvious is, of course, swimming pools.
One of the luxuries that Icelanders are afforded because of all that hot water they have under the ground is heated swimming pools. Now, it's pretty chilly out here today. You see, I'm wearing a jacket. It's 50 something degrees, yet people are still outside swimming in this pool because it is naturally heated. This pool will stay the same temperature year round. People will be swimming in this in the wintertime when the snow is falling. And that's because that water is coming out of the ground hot naturally. We would never have an outdoor heated swimming pool in the United States like this. It would just be too expensive. You'd have to use too much electricity or burn too much natural gas to keep the water hot. But here in Iceland, every little town has a heated swimming pool like this. The town I'm in currently, at best, has about 1,000 residents, even though I don't think it's that many. And yet they have this beautiful outdoor heated swimming pool they can use year round. And it's because they have the free hot water coming out of the ground naturally.
So every tiny little town's got a heated swimming pool. Some of them not even like a town. It looks just more like an area, a crossroads, and you'll see a beautiful outdoor heated swimming pool, big swimming complex. Now this is in the capital city of Reykjavik, where there's a lot more people. And I want you to notice that it says 38 degrees Celsius over there. That's nice and warm. They have this big outdoor swimming pool, lots of water slides. They have an Olympic lane pool at my back. Plus they have an indoor competition pool. They have probably 5 or 6 pools in this complex, and it's one of many in the capital city of Reykjavik. And it's because they have all that free hot water coming up out of the ground. Now you can also use that hot water at home.
So here's a practical use for all of that hot water that could come out of a hot spring. Behind me here in Iceland is a huge pipe. And what this pipe is doing is taking hot water straight from the ground and moving it to people's houses. So the water they get in their shower comes straight from the ground. They don't have to pay an electric bill to heat their hot water, which is a big deal because your hot water heater in our houses tends to be our biggest user of electricity because water doesn't heat up that easily. So it takes a lot of electricity to get hot water, which is expensive. Well, here in Iceland and other places where they have a lot of hot springs, they can just send a pipe to everybody's houses, and that's how they get their hot water in their sinks and in their showers. So think for a moment about hot water, specifically the hot water that comes out of your tap when you turn it on. Where does that water come from? Well, for most of us, we have water that's brought into our house cold, and then we put it in a tank that heats it. Either through electricity or burning natural gas, it makes a whole tank of hot water that is just sitting there ready for us to use anytime we turn on the faucet. Well, running a hot water heater costs you money because you have to pay electricity, pay natural gas to heat the water all the time, so it's right there ready. Well, here in Iceland, they do things a little bit differently because they have such a huge supply of hot water directly out of the ground. They just basically take it out of the ground, run it through a pipe, and they store it in these water tanks. These water tanks here on the hill above the capital city of Reykjavik are filled with hot water. And from here, we've got pipes that go to every house and hotel and restaurant in town. And when they turn on their faucet, they're getting hot water straight out of here. Why 4 tanks? Well, the hot water coming straight out of the ground is really too hot to be used directly in your house most times. So they have 4 separate tanks, and they fill up one, let it cool down to the point where it's usable, then they connect that one to the houses in the city. When that one empties, well, then they'll switch over to the next one and let this one fill back up again with hot water. So once again, a use of hot water from hot springs is the hot water that you need for your house.
An obvious use of hot water is cooking because we cook a lot of things in hot water.
So obviously, one of the uses of hot water is cooking things. Think about how many things you cook by putting in a pot of boiling water. Well, usually you have to make the water hot yourself. You have to burn wood or coal, or in modern times, you got to use electricity or natural gas. But here in Iceland, where they have all the free boiling water that they can handle, all they have to do is take a food item, put it in a little basket, attach it to a stick, and lower it into a hot spring, and it will cook it for you for free. And that's what I'm about to do right here. Take my eggs, lower them into this basket, let them sit in the hot spring for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to have hard boiled eggs for free.
Now, it didn't change the taste of the eggs. It was just like cooking eggs in a pot of boiling water on your stove. It's just I didn't have to pay the money for the electricity or natural gas to make the water hot. There are whole restaurants in areas that have a lot of hot spring water that specialize in cooking specifically with that hot spring water. This was kind of a fancy one. It's a trendy restaurant. They call it geothermal cuisine. It's just a fancy way of saying they're using heat from the earth and the water to cook the food that they serve. This over here is an oven. Looks like an oven, but it's being heated by hot spring water.
In addition to boiling foods, you can also capture hot spring energy and use it like an oven. That's what they've done here. They've made this little oven, this little container on top of a hot spring. You can open it up and you can put something in there in a container that will then bake inside of here. Now, it doesn't work like a traditional dry oven. You can't cook a pizza in there. And anything you have that comes out of there tends to come out fairly moist. So, think about making something like a cake. Well, what they're known for here in Iceland is making rye bread. The rye bread cooks much easier and much more moist in an oven like this, and it's actually kind of a cake-like bread. And they've been doing this for centuries in Iceland because they don't have any other way of generating heat to bake items.
So, of course, I had to try the rye bread that was baked there. Like I said, it was very much like a thicker bread. It's not like a white or a wheat bread. It's not fluffy. It's a lot more like a cake type substance, but it was good. Now, in Japan, they also use hot springs for cooking. A lot of the same methods are employed. Anything that can be traditionally boiled can be cooked in hot spring water. Eggs, corn. You'll be walking down the street in a small town in Japan, especially when it's not typically very touristy, and you'll see something like this, a little hot spring tap. And the water is coming out, hot water is coming out, and it boils some eggs in a basket. And kind of on the honor system, you can drop some coins here. I had a price list, although I couldn't read it in Japanese, but I could read it in English. It said 50 yen. Put 50 yen in there, and you can pick up a hard-boiled egg. My son enjoys boiled corn and hard-boiled eggs, so he was actually kind of happy to be walking around this hot spring town where you had cheap snacks being cooked in the hot spring water readily available. It's as simple as this. You get a long stick and a basket, put whatever it is you want to be cooked or boiled in the basket and lower it into the hot spring. In addition to eggs and corn, you can have, think about anything you can boil. Ramen noodle, or you cook by boiling ramen noodles, some seafood, anything that can be cooked by boiling, you can put in that basket and drop in the hot spring and it'll get cooked. There's one hot spring in Japan where they boil the eggs, and the mineral content is just such in that hot spring that it turns the eggshells black. Just like the mineral water in some of the hot springs change the color or tarnish my wedding ring, the minerals react with the calcium in the eggshell and will turn it black. Now you see, I opened the egg, it still looks like a hard-boiled egg. It didn't change the taste of the egg at all, it just changed the color of the eggshell. Now, you can also use this hot spring water to make electricity because basically electricity is all made the same way. It's made by boiling water, which turns into steam, which then turns a turbine or fan and a turbine, which generates electricity. So if you've already got hot, steamy water, you're way ahead of the game in terms of making electricity.
So let's look at one of the practical uses of hot spring water. Here in Iceland, they take the hot water out of the ground. They drill a well and they bring that super hot spring water up out of the ground and they run it through a pipe to this building right here. This is a geothermal power station. And what this does, it takes the hot water that will turn into steam and it'll use the steam to turn a turbine, which is basically just a fancy way of spinning a magnet to generate electricity. So one of the things that can be done with hot spring water is it can be used to generate free electricity because you don't have to burn any coal, you don't have to burn any natural gas, you don't have a problem with nuclear waste. Geothermal energy is practically free and it's not bad for the environment.
They also do this in other places where they have a lot of hot spring water. In California, there are multiple power plants that are run when they drill down and get the hot spring water and bring it up and let the steam from the superheated groundwater turn a turbine and make electricity. They also do it in New Zealand. There was a venture to do this in Hawaii that was kind of getting off the ground. They were drilling down using the heat from the volcano, and it was in the Puna region of the big island of Hawaii, and it was generating electricity for that part of the island. Unfortunately, the last volcanic eruption, this is now under, at least part of it's under the lava flow from the last eruption. So they're kind of having to start all over again. Plus, the heat under the ground changes a little bit every time you have an eruption.
So let's look at one of the things that Iceland can do with all of that cheap, almost free electricity it gets from all of the hot springs that it has. Iceland generates more electricity than their population can use. But behind me is an example of one thing that they can do with hot spring water and all of the extra electricity that it can generate. That back there is an aluminum refining plant. Aluminum, like that's in our aluminum cans, among many, many other uses. Well, the trick is with aluminum, it comes from a rock that comes out of the ground. But to get the aluminum out of the rock, you have to heat it up really, 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 really hot. And that would take a lot of coal or a lot of natural gas, take a lot of energy. It's very expensive to get aluminum from the rock it comes from, called bauxite, which is the reason why we recycle aluminum so much because it's so expensive to get in the first place. Well, here in Iceland, they've got a lot of free electricity. They can actually refine aluminum very, very cheaply because their electricity is so cheap. So back there, you notice a ship. That ship came from probably somewhere in the United States. They brought that ore, that bauxite, and they shipped it all the way here to Iceland. And they're going to put it in that factory back there and they're going to melt it and get the aluminum out. Then they're going to put the aluminum back on the ship and send it back to the United States or wherever it came from to be made into aluminum cans and such. And that's actually cheaper to do than to refine the aluminum in the United States because here the electricity is so cheap from all of the hot springs that they have.
So all over Iceland, you'll see these big tubes running across the ground. And what they are collection and transport systems for all that hot water, for whatever they want to do with it, whether it's to fill a swimming pool or to generate electricity or bring hot water into your house. You'll see how Icelanders move this hot water all over the place because they find a lot of uses for it. So once again, because there's so many hot springs and they're all over the place, driving around the country, you see these pipes all over the place. You actually go up to them, you touch them, and they'll be a little warm because it's hot spring water that's going through it. Another example of the tanks that you'll see, because their water towers, their water tanks don't have cold water in it, they have hot water. And it's to let the water cool down before they run it to your house or to whatever end use they want to use it for. Greenhouses.
So here in Iceland, it's extremely challenging to grow fruits and vegetables because of the limited amount of daylight. They have a very short growing season, and it's pretty cool for most of the year. So what they can do though is they can use all of that geothermal energy that they have to artificially grow plants inside of greenhouses. Well, how do they keep it warm enough in here so the plants don't die? That's what those pipes are back there behind me. Those pipes are bringing water from a hot spring and they're running it through those pipes, and it's keeping this greenhouse artificially warm enough so that these plants can grow. This isn't something we would do in Georgia, Florida, any other place in the United States because we don't have the free hot water that could keep a greenhouse hot. If we wanted to run a greenhouse, we'd have to use electricity, which is expensive. Now, these greenhouses here in Iceland can actually grow plants like these tomatoes back here, even in the wintertime when there is almost no sunlight. How they do that? Plants need sunlight. You'll notice up there they have what's called a grow light. That's a light that mimics the UV light that comes from the sun, and it allows the plants to grow in the wintertime. Now that's being run off of electricity. Iceland has a lot of cheap electricity because of the geothermal energy and the hydrothermal energy. So in Iceland, you can afford to run grow lights to grow your plants in the wintertime, even when there isn't a lot of sunlight.
So this is a view of one of those greenhouses from the outside. You see huge collection of these all throughout central Iceland, and you can see the grow lights are on. This particular area is known for growing tomatoes. Iceland grows about 75% of their own tomatoes. They don't have to import them because they get enough from these greenhouses. This is here is the inside of it. You can see the rows of tomatoes on both sides. There was a restaurant at this particular farm, and they're known for their tomato soup. And the restaurateurs, the chefs, the cooks, they basically walk up and down these aisles and pick the ripe tomatoes and make tomato soup from them right on site, as well as other tomato dishes. So it's kind of a unique thing that they can grow these vegetables in a place that has a very limited growing season. And it's because they have all that geothermal energy. They have the heat from hot springs, and they have the cheap electricity that they can get from the hot springs. Home heating. We can also use this water to heat our houses. Unlike how we heat our houses in Georgia with a heater that runs off electricity and natural gas, they do it with the hot water.
Another thing they use all that geothermal hot water for in Iceland is home heating. Because in Iceland, nobody has a traditional heater like you and I have, where you have a furnace that moves hot air through a system of ductworks and pipes and blows it into every room. In Iceland, every room that you want to have get hot, you have a radiator. And how this works is hot water comes in and it circulates through these little pipes here in the middle of this radiator, and every time air hits these, the air gets warm, so the air in the room gets warm. So every room in the house where you'd want heat, you have to have one of these radiators. Now the advantage to these is that, once again, they're pretty cheap here in Iceland because they're using that free hot water to make your home warm. Another advantage is you can turn these on and off for each room, so you can have one room be hotter or colder than another. So this system of heating, as long as you have free hot water, is actually pretty beneficial. It's pretty efficient. Now we would never do this in Georgia because we don't have a bunch of free hot water. A radiator would work, but you'd have to pay a lot of money to make the water going into it hot. So it's a lot more efficient to have the air blown furnaces that we typically have.
Here's some other examples. The three on the right, these are all ones in Iceland, and you can kind of see how they work. But this one here, this was in that town of Hot Springs, Montana. This is a classic old-timey looking radiator. That was a town that had a lot of hot spring water, so they used hot water through a radiator to heat the hotel. One crazy thing that they do in Iceland is they heat their sidewalks because it snows a lot. And snow makes ice, it makes it hard to walk. on the sidewalks. You got to go out there and you shovel it. So here's what they've done here. These little pipes underneath the sidewalk have hot water going through them. And they're going to come and they're going to put more pavement down on top of this sidewalk. And the sidewalk's going to stay warm in the wintertime, which means it doesn't get icy when the snow falls. Nobody would ever do this in Buffalo, New York, where they get a lot of snow, because you'd have to pay too much money to make the water hot. It wouldn't be worth it. But in Iceland, they have so much free hot water, they're able to do stuff like this that you necessarily can't do other places. Winter golfing. This is a crazy plan that has only ever been proposed in Iceland. Icelanders love golf. I mean, they love it. Yeah, I mean, the golf courses all over the place. They're easy to maintain. The population wants them. Problem is, you can't play golf in the wintertime. The picture on the left notwithstanding, which is snow golf. It's kind of a weird, niche kind of hobby. You can't play golf in a regular golf course because it's covered with snow. What they are suggesting doing in a golf course in Reykjavik is running heated water pipes underneath enough of the golf course that the snow will melt and you would still have grass and you would be able to play golf in the wintertime. Now, they haven't done it yet, but it's an idea that would never, ever be considered anywhere else. But in Iceland, where they got a bunch of free hot water, they might actually do it. One of the last unique kind of applications for this hot spring water is this salt works. And this is once again in Iceland. And Icelanders, they get really creative how they use this free hot water because they've got so much of it. Most of you know what sea salt is. It comes from the sea. Well, the way the Icelanders get this is actually very efficient. It's a very unique way of producing sea salt because they have so much hot spring water.
So back there is the ocean, which is salt water. It's water that has salt in it. Well, we like salt. We like to put it on our food. We need salt as one of our daily nutrients. So we can get the salt that we need from ocean water. It's called sea salt, and you'll see it in the grocery store. It's a popular way to get the salt that we want to use. But seawater is only about 3% salt. So you don't get a lot of salt straight from seawater. It's almost not worth your time to try to get salt from seawater. It's too low a concentration. But remember that hot water will hold more minerals than cold water. So if I could make the ocean warm, I could get it to actually hold a little bit more salt. Well, I'm at the salt works here in Iceland, and you can see behind me it says hot water from a hot spring. So what they do here is they mix the ocean water with hot spring water, which means that it can then hold a lot more salt. Well, a lot of the water evaporates off, and then what they wind up with is really, really, really salty water. The water has more salt in it because it's hot water, and it can hold more salt than the normal cold seawater. So now here's what they do. They take that extra salty water. It's up to about 28, 29, 30% now salt. A lot more than the ocean water is normally. And they pump it into these pans back here in this room. And they just let the water cool down. And what happens is cold water can't hold as many minerals as hot water. So it starts to drop the salt. And the salt cakes on the bottom of these pans, and they literally come in here with a shovel and a rake and they just scrape off all of that salt that the cold water couldn't hold anymore. And now you've got sea salt.
Okay, so we're going to have our unit test on groundwater on Monday. The topics presented in these hot springs presentations will be included on the test.